Hello. Good afternoon, readers. It's Tilly here from Tilly Shelf and
Roz from Scallydandling about the books.
And we're here to talk to you about a play called The Rover by Aphra Behn.
As part of our monthly discussing drama series.
Yeah, and it's also part of another read-along as well.
It is, because we picked this play this month because June 2021 is the first ever Ancientsathon with two lovely hosts. And the one that comes to mind is Tori of Hufflepuff Discovery, and I've forgotten the other one, but we'll put it in the show notes. And but it's a month of encouraging us to read things from before 1700. So that's from ancient to relatively recent, but there's a period that a lot of people might happen to not read anything from, unless maybe Shakespeare, say, or Homer if they're feeling smart. Yeah.
We chose a more recent one in this selection because last month we read a play by a man, and we tried to kind of not necessarily alternate, but to keep a bit of a balance going on. So we wanted to choose a female playwright. So we chose one of the earliest female playwrights to ever make a living writing for the stage, and that's Aphra Behn. She did also go by the stage pen name Astrea, which I think is just lovely. And she was born... It's a bit of a patchy story for her because everything's quite uncertain. If you read Wikipedia, it'll give you about 3 different options for her life. I've tended to go with the introduction from our edition, which is Simon Trussler wrote the introduction. So she was born probably around 1640. She wasn't from an immensely well-to-do background. She might have been the daughter of a was it a butcher or a barber?
A barber.
Yeah. Although they covered similar areas at the time, didn't they? Or no, that's
barbers and surgeons.
But she might also have been the daughter of somebody who was then made the Lieutenant General of Suriname, and she travelled to Suriname in her 20s, as part of accompanying either a family member or somebody she was working with, or just somebody generally. Got there, stayed there for a while, travelled back again, and generally led quite an interesting and lively life for a woman at the time. So she married somebody with the surname Behn, who might have been a merchant. He then died, so she had the freedom that comes with being a widow, I suppose, as opposed to being an unmarried young woman. She then
didn't have real financial freedom, did she?
Oh no, she definitely didn't.
She needed to make a living.
Yeah. She then got involved via a person called Killingrue, who was a big man in the theatre, but also in the kind of espionage service. So she went and was a spy during the Dutch Wars, and she spent some time in Antwerp. And then she came back and she spent some time in debtor's prison because she didn't have any money. So her solution to that was to start writing for theatre. And by the time she wrote The Rover, she'd been doing it for about 7 years. And this is about her 5th play that we know of. That was successfully put on in London. So we thought we chose it because it's one that she's still not necessarily known for today, but it's one that's still recognised and seen as maybe one of her earlier successes.
Yeah. And the reason that I particularly wanted to choose her was because of what Virginia Woolf says about her.
Yeah, it's a lovely quote.
It's just such a lovely quote. So in a room of her own, and I've lost it and I've got to re-find it. So give me one second. Dear. I'm just bad, I'm sorry, I'm a poor booktuber.
You focus on finding it. So just before this video, we made sure that we found all of these quotes and things.
Virginia Woolf said in a room of one's own, which is of course about women getting to write, as it were. She said, all women together ought to let flowers fall upon the tomb of Aphra Behn, for it was she who earned them the right to speak their minds.
Which
there
is
you go. So I felt embarrassed that I'd never read anything by her.
Yeah. And I think it was definitely worth reading something by her. So her plays were very, very popular when they first came out, and they were popular for like a good 100 years afterwards. They fell out of favour during the more moral centuries. They didn't really fit in well with Victorian sensibilities, which I'm sure we'll mention some of that later on.
I mean, what could you possibly object to in this play?
I know. But when we got to around 1980,
it's racy, people. Okay, are you ready
it's a little bit scandalous.
That's
around the
some inspiration
1980s
for you.
feminists sort of rediscovered her as somebody to celebrate. I think even up to today, there's a movement to get a statue built of her in her hometown of Canterbury, or the place where we think she might have been born in Canterbury.
Canterbury want to claim her because you know.
Because why wouldn't you?
Yeah, and I just have to say, it's this brilliant campaign around Britain to get more statues of women, because someone did like a kind of an audit of all the public statues there are, you know, in towns and so on, and discovered that it was only like they're all of men basically, which you kind of know, but
I think it's
when
3% of statues in Britain are of non-royal women.
Yeah. So unless you're Queen Victoria, basically, get it.
Yeah. So I think it would be really great to have a statue of Aphra Behn near the place where she might have been born. So from the 1980s onwards, people were kind of like, oh, this is a really great female playwright that we should be not forgetting about, basically. Yes. So coming to it as a 21st century feminist, I guess, didn't always meet my expectations. Strangely, this 17th century play doesn't meet all my sensibilities.
But did you like it as a play?
I did. I did it. I enjoyed it. I felt like it discussed some really interesting topics. It had some great characters in it. And on the whole, it was a good play. How about you?
I loved it. There were moments in it when I got a little bit lost or confused, I have to say, and we might sort of come back to that. You know, it has an almost farcical quality at times, and there's a chunk in the middle where there's all this fighting going on, and you know who's fighting who, and they're all in disguise, and blokes with swords, you know.
And you just have to kind of think, I have to assume it doesn't really matter too much, and we'll find out in the end.
Yes, and also I thought this would make better sense if I was seeing it like you have this idea of people running in and running out, and you know, so but that apart, I thought it was really tight, and I actually thought it was really well written, you know, like really sharp, smart language and great characters. So
she's got a real knack for dialogue, I think, and it would be fantastic to see some of that dialogue portrayed on the stage, I suppose.
And I think as an actor, you know, you could have a lot of fun performing this. It's a funny romp, I suppose.
So I'm not going to attempt to try and do a plot summary. I think we agreed that would be a little bit too confusing, but basically it's set in Naples at the time of the carnival just before Lent. And we've got about 3 unmarried young women and around about 4 or 5 young men, soldiery type characters. Actually, it's numbers of people. I just remember there's Valeria as well, but she's kind of a minor character. And there's 2 of them, Florinda and Belleville, are already in love and they want to get married, but Florinda's dad and brother want her to marry different people, like not just a different person, but different people. So they've got different designs on.
One person, and her brother wants to marry another.
For kind of the usual reasons, politics, money, and so on. But anyway, she's in love with Belleville. Belleville, meanwhile, is hanging out with this guy called Wilmore, who is the Rover.
Oh, and you know, anything that word, the Rover, conjures up for you, that's that character for sure. I mean, he's a character that would only work if performed by an actor who is handsome and has oodles of charisma.
As must have been the case.
Bloody murder, he does.
Really does. So an actor with a lot of charisma and great good looks would be exemplified by Will Mountfort, who performed the character of Wilmore in the time of Queen Mary, and she herself described him as dangerous to see because he made vice so alluring. Which is definitely the kind of actor that you need in this role, because otherwise you're just like, why? Yeah,
and Queen Mary would be, as in William and Mary, the sort of late Tudor, Stuart monarchs. Yes, so like you know, some years after this play was written and performed, but when it was still popular.
Remained popular. Yeah.
And
what else? So they kind of
we've got these women and we've got these men, and basically they're all and they're all kind of like falling in love or looking to have sex with each other, or fighting each other over those alternatives.
They're all trying to get with each other or fight each other for the right to get with each other. It gets a bit confusing.
And it all kind of comes out in the wash at the end, but for most of the characters. But, well, what do you think?
Well, for me, like I said when we were talking about this before, it reminded me very much of Much Ado About Nothing, because there's a lot of good humor and good comedy. There's a lot of great kind of witty repartee and characters that you kind of feel like they've got a lot of chemistry. But there's also a lot of, when you get to there's women dressing up as men and people in masquerades and all of that kind of party stuff. But when you get to the end and people start getting...
I just say that the inexplicable thing that, like, people know each other quite well, but they put a mask or a costume on and suddenly they've got no idea who they are. It does that all the time. You just have to suspend your disbelief. Anyway, so all that happens, but then...
But like Much Ado About Nothing, you get to the end and people get married off, and you have to think, actually, I'm really not happy with the ending for these characters, and characters that you... in some cases have really come to like and get invested in, like Helena, who's a brilliant young woman with agency and passion and a lot of enthusiasm, ends up getting married to, spoiler warning, to Wilmore the Rover, who is guilty of...
He's a love brat.
Also kind of sexual assault, you know, not
a nice man.
Not really upstanding behaviour, really. But it's okay. It's all okay in the end. Nobody minds, really.
Live happily ever after. We think not. But
yes. So you get to the end and you're kind of left with a bit of an uncomfortable feeling.
Yeah. But I didn't dwell on that because I'd had such fun getting there. And I think the to be fair to Wilmore, we're going to be a little bit fair to Wilmore, but all that be English. So some of these characters are English, some of them are Spanish and Italian, but some of them are English, and they're kind of like roaming around Europe. And the reason that they're in that position is a political one, and that was the impact of the English Civil War. And we know that Aphra Behn was in favour of the Restoration, and she's a royalist, as it were, and so it was quite interesting that she sort of drew attention to the fact that had basically the Civil War kind of messed up their lives and destabilised things, and so that's perhaps why they're not being as upright and appropriate.
So we have to recognise that these young men have come through periods of war. They've then lost, a lot of them have lost familial wealth and livelihoods, and then kind of been tossed out into Europe to kind of make their own way, going from battle to battle. There hasn't been a lot of stability in their lives. There probably hasn't been a lot of lawfulness. So to a certain extent, it is... you can see where these patterns of behaviour might emerge. That's not to condone them. And I guess the reason why they figure so prominently in Aphra Behn's works, but also works of other playwrights at the time, was because after the Restoration, a lot of these young men kind of came back. And after, a couple of decades of wandering lawlessly across Europe, they then were wandering lawlessly across England, around London, and coming to see these plays. So it was that experience was a familiar one to her audiences.
Yeah. Thinking of which, I think one of the things we know about her is that she was writing in order to make her living. So she had to make plays that people would want to come and see, and you really kind of see her kind of like playing to the gallery some of the time. I really liked some of the bits where she got the foreign characters, the Spanish or the Italian characters, to sort of talk about the English, and you could just imagine the audience like sort of just lapping that up. Like,
Yeah.
I've got one for you. Okay, so Lucetta, who's a sort of bawdy thief type woman character, says he's English too, and they say that's a sort of good-natured, loving people, and have generally so kind an opinion of themselves that a woman with any wit may flatter him into any sort of fool she pleases. You know, so you just think, oh, all the audience have a lovely
There's also a lot of jokes about Essex, which I found quite entertaining because people still make a lot of jokes about Essex.
Yeah. Yes, I couldn't quite believe it when I was seeing that.
Yeah, there's
the fool county of fun.
Yeah, the fool character, Ned Blunt, is from Essex, and they make a lot of jokes about him being, you know, from Essex and what that means about his personality and abilities. He then also turns out to be a bit of an unpleasant character, shall we say, but let's just brush all that under the carpet and focus on the nice bits. So like you were saying, Aphra Behn was writing to make a living, and so she had to incorporate things that the audience would like. I just wanted to mention about the third night thing, just because I think it's kind of interesting.
I like that. That was interesting.
So from the introduction from Trussler, apparently there was a kind of a system at the time where the author didn't get paid for writing their play, and it wasn't like in Shakespeare's time where an author would be kind of attached to a company, a theatre company, and their profits kind of went up and down as that company prospered. Instead, the author would write a play, give it to a theatre company, and they would perform it on its, do a first night. And if it did well enough to have a first night and a second night and a third night, the third night was when the author would get their money, and they got all the ticket proceeds from that third night. So you had to write a play that was going to kind of shock and delight and entertain enough that people would want to keep putting it on for multiple nights, because it didn't necessarily happen. There was a lot of turnover of plays at the time. And then like persuade enough people to come to it that you would actually be able to get that income from the third night. Otherwise, all the time and effort that you put into that play was for nothing. If the play then went on to do really well, which the Rover did, there were other nights, like certain fixed nights that were like author money earning nights, which just a really strange concept. Like, like, oh, if it makes its 11th night, then you get some more money from it.
Then you get money.
So strange.
But but I can quite see why people would come back, and I can imagine coming, given that this was an era when you didn't have so many alternative forms of entertainment, I can imagine coming back more than once, sort of, and anticipating some of the wit and the humor, and like choosing to
I can see that. In the same way that people rewatch a show today, like knowing when the jokes are going to land sometimes makes it more funny. Particularly with potentially, I can see it being maybe an element of improv in some of the fighting scenes, and that like there's a lot of kind of running around. There's potential for some slapstick to be thrown in there, or for the humor to be, I think in a modern production you might play down some of the humor and focus on some of the darker elements, or on some of the kind of more the female characters and their kind of restrictions and destinies, I suppose. So there's a lot of different scope.
Let's talk about the female characters, because that is for perhaps what makes the play most interesting. I mean, we've said it's very entertaining and witty and lovely language, but that what makes it most interesting perhaps to a modern, to you and I as modern women readers, is the portrayal of kind of like female characters and female options, I suppose. I don't know, do you want to sort of
could start. So the play opens with a scene of the two sisters, Florinda and Helena, discussing, I guess, their options and their futures in life. And like we said, Florinda's destined for marriage as her brother or her dad sees fit, and she's trying to kind of subvert that and get with the man that she wants. And Helena is destined to be sent to a convent, and they both kind of agree that they're not really up for this, and decide to go out into the carnival and see if they can figure things out a little bit better for themselves. Then the other main female character is Angelica, and she's the kind of the third option, I suppose, for a woman to be, I guess the only option that offered her financial independence that is presented in this play is to be a high class courtesan, I suppose, and she's decided to sell herself for 1,000, is it ducats?
1,000, yeah, and that's for a month. So
Yeah.
that's like a huge amount of money. She's putting a very high price on herself, put it that way. Yeah. But still, she's selling herself. But but equally, like Florinda talks about, the man that her father wants to marry her off to. It is basically for money. So it's,
and Angelica at least has the choice.
Yeah. Indeed. Well, she's doing it. Yeah. But and then the character that in some ways was like Florinda, she wants to choose her own husband and to marry for love and so on, but she accepts a sort of a conventional, morality that, she wants to be a virtuous woman and a virtuous wife, although she'll kind of like take a few risks to get there, as it were, and to defy her family and so on. But Helena is just, like, to me, seemed quite a radical character for the time, in that it's like, I don't want to be a nun, though that's what people are planning for me. And it's actually like, it's not like, oh, I want to get married. It's like, I want to have fun. I want to flirt, and I want to have, try out having a lover, and, I want to do these things, and I'm going to make it happen.
She says, if nobody asks me, I'm going to ask them. Like, I'm not going to go through this day of carnival without getting a dance, without getting a kiss, without getting what I want.
Yeah. And you can see why this fell out of favor in sort of more moral times, in that she's not portrayed as being wicked, really, naughty. It's kind of naughty but nice, as opposed to
and she does get married at the end, and she does. There are times when Wilmore definitely propositions her with, let's go to bed now, and she's like, well, maybe let's wait till we've seen a priest. So she does kind of stick to, I guess, some of those expected norms, but she does it in a very rebellious way. I saw some of that rebelliousness as desperation, because the part of the setup is that this is the last day of freedom before she's permanently confined to a convent. So I kind of saw this as like, this is her only opportunity to do anything other than be a nun. So she's kind of pushed into that rebelliousness, I suppose. But it doesn't stop her from being a very engaging character.
And I did feel the implication was that she was prepared to have if she did, yes, she ends up getting married, and yes, she says, oh no, not till we've got a priest. But I got the impression that if she thought this was going to be her last night and she really was going to go into the monastery, she was going to go all the way before she did.
At one point she says something like, I want to experience it so that when I'm shut up in the convent, I can be walking around thinking about sex and nobody will know.
Yeah,
that's what she says at one point, which obviously doesn't turn out to happen.
So although that doesn't turn out to happen, that she was completely contemplating that as a
course
one
of
of the alternatives. Yeah, which is most intriguing for the age.
But then should we mention what happens when a woman does sort of go all the way without a priest?
Yep.
To the unfortunate Angelica, who's the kind of the loose end of the play. Did you want to? Yeah,
well, yes, the loose end of the play is because where Florinda and Helena get given a happy ending, we may not be sure that it's a happy ending, really, but that's our,
they get married, which is the conventional
convention. Whereas Angelica kind of goes off with someone who's going to pay her £1,000 for per month, but it feels like that's quite a downbeat ending for her.
She's also driven to real desperation. She gets deceived by the Rover, and she gets driven to the point of finding a pistol and threatening him, and being really quite distraught.
She loses some of her dignity, doesn't she?
Definitely.
So I think that's why we found it sad, because earlier she felt like she had agency, and she's not, and she doesn't just accept being tricked by him, or as it were, because she's never really been in love, and then she falls in love with him and gives herself to him for free, and then feels but she doesn't.
She is deceived.
But her reaction is to want to shoot him, not
Yeah. She wants revenge.
She wants revenge rather than pity, I suppose.
Yeah. She doesn't wallow in despair, I suppose.
No.
So thinking about Wilmore and people being deceived by the Rover, I just wanted to say I'm reading for my poem a day at the moment, I'm reading John Donne, and like it was almost too much reading this book on top of having read multiple John Donne poems in the last week. I
presume you're not currently the poems you're reading are before he got religion then? Yeah,
before he got religion. It's all to his mistress going to bed, and that's the flea and all of this kind of, oh, please come to bed with me.
Yes, I'll use lots of clever words and then we'll have sex.
Yes, which is pretty much Wilmore's game as well, isn't it? And it struck me that Donne was at the early 1600s was writing these poems, and this is 1670s. They're 70 years apart, and there's a huge amount of social and political turmoil in that time. We've got the Civil War, we've got religious and social structure changes, I suppose, that go about in that time. But there's very much the same kind of ideals of the way that men speak to women, and the way that love is supposed to play out, I suppose, and this idealized the kind of the mistress idea, I suppose.
That's true. And the thing that I thought of when I was reading it was Andrew Marvell and to his coy mistress, which is a poem that I know you've read. If anyone out there watching this has never read it, do. It's great. But it's that same kind of like,
it's the ideal of a man, begging and pleading with his mistress, using all of the fancy words possible to kind of trick her into bed, which is what Wilmore does.
And I think perhaps the reason that we feel a kind of negative towards Wilmore, I did certainly, was that like there's a nasty side to his wit and how he took, so he ends up marrying, but earlier on I know there was he said various things, like there's one where he said, oh, all the honey of matrimony but none of the sting, friend. That's what he wants, that's what he's hoping to get. It's almost like then he has to it's an unpleasantness, and when he's sort of more or less attempting to rape
he is
he attempts she says, oh well, I'm going to shout rape, and he says, oh, and like, who's going to believe you, why at this time of night was your cobweb door set open, dear spider, but to catch flies.
And he also says, if this were to go before a judge, the judge would see the provocation in your eyes, and not lay the blame for starting this on me. So victim blaming in the 17th century.
Definitely. So so yes, we're not
he's an uncomfortable character.
We're not going to feel delighted that Helena ends up with him. Goodness me, do you think we've said all the things that we should say about this play? What do you think?
We're coming up to half an hour, so I think we should probably wind up. I could keep talking about this because I think there were other kind of themes and things, but I think we've probably said enough. We've said enough.
And I think it's credit to the play that yes, there is loads more that one could bring out of this, and it was. I suppose one thing struck me was that although it's only some sort of 60, 70 years after Shakespeare, it's a lot easier to read, don't you think?
Yeah. It is easier to read. I would say I know, was it George Bernard Shaw, somebody said was the best English playwright since Shakespeare or something. I would say I've liked Aphra Behn's play a lot better, and I would definitely read more by her. And I think, I don't want to, sound like I'm copying other people's opinions, but I really think she should have more recognition, and that these plays should be in performance more, because
it's not the rich depth of ideas of a Shakespeare. It's popular, it's very sort of, it's like his comedies.
Yeah, that's what I was kind of going to say. Like, if Much Ado About Nothing is still loved, I don't see why this shouldn't.
Why shouldn't this be? Absolutely.
Or still be plays by her should still.
So I say adds larrikins to you.
Adds hartlikins. That's hartlikins.
Hartlikins. This is
the
bizarre.
Catchphrase of one of the characters.
You keep saying adds
hartlikins. So in the glossary, it says that adds hartlikins means God's little heart.
Yeah. So this is our new exclamation. Adds hartlikins. Bye.
Thank you very much for watching.
Bye.
And next month we'll be back with another discussing drama themed around Jane Austen for Jane Austen in July. So it might be another. Hang on, I've lost the thing. Let's just leave now. Goodbye.